sweeping the nation. And you guys started.
It sounds like a real thing.
All right. So let's start with seeds. So seeds obviously are reproductive structures. And inside of a seed are several parts. Now a seed forms from what? What turns into a seed? A structure we've already mentioned. Come on?
The ovules.
The ovules. These tiny little ovules inside of this ovary. If they are pollinated, if a pollen grain lands on the stigma, grows a tube to reach into the ovary, sends a little cell to fertilize the ovule. If that happens, the ovule can then grow and develop into a seed. Okay? And so the seed itself contains, like I said, several parts. It's a mature ovule that's formed inside of a fruit. So if the ovule develops into the seed, what develops into the fruit? Come on?
The seed.
No, the ovule develops into the seed, but the seed develops within the fruit. What turns into the fruit? Not a part of the flower. Dean? The ovary. So this base of the pistil, this surrounding part, that develops into the fruit. And again, the seed is inside of that. The ovary starts to enlarge, okay, starts to build up, and that eventually becomes a fruit. So when you're holding a fruit in your hand, what you're actually holding is the ripened ovary of a plant. Okay? And that's what fruits are. And inside are seeds, which are the baby embryos of those plants. Okay? So this is an ovary, a ripened ovary. Inside of that seed itself, there are also some parts. Okay? Inside of the seed, the majority of it is stored up energy. Okay? It's starchy material. Okay? That's called the cotyledon. There's also a tiny little embryo of a plant in there with tiny little immature leaves and roots. And then that whole package is surrounded by sort of a hard outer covering called the seed coat. How many people at your house, your parents, buy whole wheat bread? They used to. Okay. What's the other type of bread? White bread. Comes from white flour versus whole wheat flour. The differences are in how they process. Where does flour come from? Wheat. It's wheat seeds. And to make white flour, they process the wheat seeds. They get rid of the seed coat. They get rid of the tiny little embryo. Okay? And then they only use the starchy food portion of the seed to make the flour. That's white bread. To make whole wheat flour and whole wheat bread, they grind up the entire seed, including the seed coat and the plant embryo and that starch. And so it has a different texture. You know, it tastes different because those other parts are still included. All right. So when a plant produces seeds, is it ideal if the seeds just drop to the soil and grow right there? Why not? Grady?
Because there's already a tree there, so it wouldn't really make sense for more trees to go in
Right.
the place.
There's already an adult plant growing there. These new seedlings would be competing with that plant for nutrients and water and sunlight. Just doesn't really make sense. So most plants have a means of dispersing their seeds, spreading them out, getting them to other new areas to grow. Okay. And some plants utilize wind as a method of seed dispersal. You guys know what this is, right? That's a dandelion. After what's happened? So what's the yellow dandelion? Yeah? And it hasn't been pollinated. Once those individual flowers, a dandelion is not actually one flower. It's a compound flower. Each tiny little section in that is a flower. But anyway, once those tiny little flowers are pollinated, then they develop into seeds. And what's attached to each seed? Little fuzzy thing, right? And so the wind or you pick it up and you blow it, and those little fuzzy things float around, and attached to each one is a seed. And so that allows those seeds to disperse and start to grow in other parts of your lawn, and then your parents are mad at you about it. You've seen these seeds before, right?
Yeah.
You know what tree they come from? Yeah, they're maple seeds. And you probably throw them in the air and they helicopter down, right? That's an adaptation for seed dispersal. As those seeds fall from the trees and start spinning, if a wind current picks up, it brings them somewhere else to land and eventually grow. Some plants even use water as a means of seed dispersal, like a coconut. Coconuts fall into the water, float away, wash up somewhere else, and a new plant starts to sprout out of that coconut, and it's their means of seed dispersal. Fruits are an important means of seed dispersal, like we just talked about. Fruits contain seeds inside of them. Okay? And animals are attracted to the nutrients provided by the fruit, the energy that's stored in it. Okay? So the animals consume the fruits, and animals eat the whole fruit. They don't throw away the little core section like I just did. And so those seeds go through their digestive tract and eventually out when the animal goes to the bathroom in a different place, and those seeds have been dispersed. Some fruits have burrs on them, sticky little clingy extensions, like burdocks. Yep, they are. And those burrs stick onto the fur of an animal. Eventually they fall off, but they fall off somewhere else, and the seeds have been dispersed. Nuts. Some animals store and bury nuts, like a squirrel, for example, but then they forget about them. And so some of those will grow into new plants, new trees. So these are all means of seed dispersal. Really cool one is this. These are sometimes called jewelweed or touch-me-nots. Okay, snapdragons, I think, are the same thing. You find them all around here in the springtime. You may have never noticed them, but go seek them out. They're really cool. They grow when the fruit matures, it's in a little pod. It looks almost like a pea pod. Okay? And if you touch the pea pod, it's sort of spring-loaded, it explodes, and it sends the seeds flying out. Here, this video will show a little touch-me-not bursting.
I find it huge one.
Yeah, they grow them in bushes where you find tons of them. Yeah. So, all means of seed dispersal.
What's that other
Yeah, what's the other one?
That's not. This is just all about. It's a song.
Oh.
We'll see what happens at the end of class.
What's that?
All right. So again, animals are very important not only in pollination, like insects are important in pollination, but also in seed dispersal. Generally larger animals. So again, you have the bird, the monkey eating the banana, turtle eating this tiny little heart-shaped piece of strawberry right here. But all of these consume the seeds and then eventually poop them out in a new area. That's some bear poop. Okay, all those seeds in there have been dispersed. Probably some sort of raspberry. That's a lot of seeds.
Oh my.
That's from a fox. And that's from a raccoon. So good. Yeah. Bet you didn't think you were going to see that today. The next time you're hiking along the woods and you see some animal poop on there, check it out. See if we see any seeds being disturbed. So, have you ever had people say, oh, no, actually, tomatoes fruit, and say it like that? It's annoying. They're right. Are you that person? No, you're that guy? Okay. But yes, anything that contains seeds within it, whether it's a pepper, or a tomato, or a zucchini, or an eggplant, they're all fruits. Because they are all the ripened ovaries, they contain seeds within them. And they are fruits. So what are vegetables then? Some difference. Dean?
The beans have seeds
Yeah, but so where do vegetables come from? Grape?
under the ground.
Sometimes either under the ground, or their leaves, like lettuce, or stalks, like celery. Those are vegetables. They come from the other parts of the plant, not from the fruits. All right.
Oh, that makes sense.
Question?
Wait, so like, also like, aren't the vegetables like their own plant? Like fruits like come off like trees?
No, not fruits come from plants as well, not just trees. So,
But like a carrot like is an individual plant? Like,
it's a root of a plant, sort of.
yeah, but like,
I don't know.
know. Probably don't. You guys need to learn
All right.
grace language.
The what?
The grace language.
Oh,
I
yes.
mean, I know do Rossian.
Yes, yeah, that's a well
Well
learned.
Spanish.
All right, so germination. So once these seeds are dispersed, they will eventually germinate. What does germinate mean? A seed germinates. Right?
Sprouts and opens.
Yeah, it opens up and sprouts and grows. That's what germination is. A plant growing from a seed. And so seeds require certain conditions, and it depends on the type of seed. But in general, what are some things that seeds need before they germinate? Carter?
Water.
They need water. So when seeds are exposed to water, it helps sort of soften up the seed coat, helps activate enzymes that are going to start to break down the stored up food. What else do they need? Come on.
Soil.
Well, not so much the soil itself, like you could sprout seeds without soil.
Nutrients in the soil.
Not so much the nutrients for soil.
Sun.
They don't need any sun because they grow in the soil, right? So they don't have any sun while they germinate. They need oxygen. Okay, oxygen. Because they're going to be breaking down that stored material in the seed, and that process is respiration, which requires oxygen. And they also need the proper temperature. Okay? Because enzymes depend on temperature. That's important. So when a seed actually germinates, here's sort of what it looks like. You know, it absorbs water, it swells up and sort of breaks open the seed coat. The root starts to emerge as oxygen gets in there. The starch in that seed is broken down to mobilize the energy. The root begins to grow downward, okay, into the soil. The stem of the plant starts to emerge out of the soil, okay, pops up above the soil. Now the cotyledon is sort of the leftover stored up energy that the plant is using at first. And then eventually the first leaves can emerge from the seed. And then once they emerge, they can start photosynthesis. And then the plant switches from using the energy stored in the seed to energy it's receiving through photosynthesis. But plants can reproduce asexually as well. Okay? Asexual, prefix A means without. And again, we've talked about this many times. Asexual reproduction involves only one parent and produces identical copies. So some plants in nature rely on asexual reproduction as well as sexual reproduction. For example, grass reproduces asexually through the use of what we call rhizomes. A rhizome is this stem that grows underneath the ground horizontally and then pops up new shoots at various places that grow into their own plants. And so here you have the original grass plant, which grew a rhizome horizontally under the soil, and then popped up these other grass plants. But it didn't involve pollen and pollination or sexual reproduction. These plants are just clones of the original plant. Now this is useful often to sort of colonize an area very quickly. You know, if you plant some grass seed in a bare patch of your lawn, some of those seeds will germinate and grow. But then most of that area will fill in with grass seeds producing rhizomes and popping up these clones. Strawberries, for example, and some sort of lawn weeds grow in a similar way, but when it's above ground, we call them runners. A stem grows above the ground, and then when it touches some bare soil, it grows roots, which develop into a new plant. And so plants can colonize an area using runners as well. Now, there are advantages to asexual reproduction for plants. So, if you have a successful original plant that's doing well, well then asexual reproduction is a benefit because all of its clones are also going to be well adapted. You can have those characteristics that allow the original to be successful. It can happen faster. It doesn't rely on first pollen being spread and then pollination and forming a fruit and developing seeds. It can happen more quickly. But the disadvantage is that, again, it doesn't add any variation to the species. It doesn't introduce new combinations of characteristics. And so if you have a large area of all identical plants, if one disease sort of can affect that plant, well then it's going to affect every plant in that area because they're all genetically identical. If there were some variation, maybe some of the plants would have been resistant to this disease. But if they're all clones, then if one's susceptible to it, they all are. Another means of asexual reproduction was used to produce this plant and this plant. It's called fragmentation or cutting. Basically, to grow this plant, I took a leaf off of this spider plant, I put it in some water, and now it's growing into its own plant here. You can see it grew roots, okay? And it's another plant. Again, this is a clone of this plant. It was reproduced asexually because there was no pollen involved. I just took a cutting from that and planted it in this water. This plant is also reproducing asexually. This is a succulent. It would produce flowers eventually, but it hasn't yet. But what you see emerging from the soil are some tiny little plants. They're just clones of this. They're popping up through the ground. If you take a leaf from this succulent and you stick it in some soil, it will grow roots and it will grow into a new plant. But it's just a copy of this original plant. It's called cutting. And that's used sometimes in agriculture. If you have in your backyard, you grew some awesome tomato plant that produced really great tomatoes and they're big and they tasted good and there's resistant to disease. If you wanted an exact copy of that plant, well, you could take a leaf from that tomato, put it in some moist soil, it would root, and it would grow into another tomato plant. And it's going to have the exact same characteristics as the plant it was cloned from. One last idea, this is kind of neat. Sometimes in agriculture, people use grafting, where they actually take two different types of plants and graft them together. Okay? Joining two different plants. Here is a plant where they grafted both a section of a peach branch and a section of a plum branch on one plant. And so here you have a tree growing, and on one side it's producing plums and the other side is producing peaches. Here's a plant growing two different varieties of apples on one tree. The way they do this is they take the base part, usually like a strong, sturdy plant with good roots and a straight trunk. They cut it off and they make a slit in it. The bottom part's called the stock. Then they take whatever they want to graft onto it, called the scion, and they sort of put it into that slit, like this, wrap it up, seal it up, and the vascular tissue, the xylem and phloem, will heal between these two grafts and become continuous, and they can continue growing. Okay? And that's where you end up. You took two types of apple branches, grafted them onto one root stock, and that's where these came from. If in like your house, if you have any landscaping, sometimes they have those umbrella trees. Does anyone have one of those umbrella trees? If you look closely at them next time, look underneath. Those are usually grafted plants where you have, they took whatever type of plant that is, and that grows a straight trunk, and then on top of it, they graft another tree that grows with that umbrella pattern. So it's actually two different trees grafted on top of each other. If you look towards the top where the umbrella part starts, you'll notice like a swollen area, because as this heals, it's swollen, and you can probably see where they made the graft of that plant.
Is that why some of them have like tape?
Sometimes they tape them up like that. Yeah, if they graft it, they use tape or sometimes like a wax to seal that up so no disease or anything or insects can get in.
There's a tree, and I think at Syracuse, and it's got like 40 different fruits.
Oh, really? Yeah, you can do multiple grafts on it. And though, again, those are produced by humans. Like they never would grow, they couldn't reproduce naturally. They're just grafted one on top of the other. You're familiar, I'm sure, with carnivorous plants like the Venus flytrap and so forth. Now, why do they consume insects? Brian?
For like extra energy?
Yeah, that's what people often say, but it's actually not correct. Are they autotrophs or heterotrophs? Who's confident in their answer and wants to explain to me why you're so confident? Joey?
Because they're plants.
Okay.
Autotrophs.
True. Yeah, all plants are autotrophs. They are autotrophs. They are green. They produce glucose in the green parts of the plant. That's where they get their energy. So why would they eat insects? They do not receive any energy from the insects. So they're not using them for energy. Not for fun either. They are doing it, Katie?
Is it because they don't want the insects to give
It's a
them?
good idea, but no.
The insects have pollen on them and they're bringing
No.
it inside the.
No. They do that for nutrients. Does anyone take vitamin every morning? So is that providing you with any actual energy?
No.
No, it's providing you certain nutrients that we need, okay, vitamin C and so forth. You don't get energy out of those. It's not like eating a bowl of cereal. Well, the same is true of plants. Plants need certain nutrients. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium are the big ones. And these carnivorous plants, they live in areas in which the soil is very low in nutrients. Often they grow in bogs that are waterlogged, and there's not a lot of nutrients. So because they can't obtain enough nitrogen or phosphorus from the soil, they've adapted to capturing insects, breaking down their tissue, and absorbing those nutrients from the insects. There are some carnivorous plants which snap close. They're called snap traps, like the Venus flytrap. Some use like a sticky residue that traps insects, like this sundew plant. Others are like a trap in that insects go into them but are unable to get out, like this pitcher plant.
Yeah, isn't there like water inside?
Yeah, and there's water in those. I'll show you this video at the end of class. This is the last topic we need to talk about. So, you may not often think about it, but plants can respond to stimuli. Okay? And they can respond in movement and growth. For example, if you look at this geranium back here, what do you notice about the way it's growing? Grace?
Growing towards like the window.
Yeah, it's growing towards the window. Okay? It's growing in response to the stimulus of the sun. Okay? This is something called phototropism. Okay? It's growth in response to some stimulus, in this case, light. And plants can respond to a whole host of stimuli, not just light. Plants can respond to water, in that roots will grow toward a source of water. If you have a plant growing in this water more in one area, the roots will grow towards that water. That's a tropism, hydrotropism. You could take a plant and plant it in the soil sideways, and the shoots of that plant will grow upward, the roots will grow downward. They grow in response to gravity. Call that gravitropism. The Venus flytrap, that's an example of thigmotropism, response to touch. Skip this, but here's a couple of videos to show some of these tropisms. They're all time-lapse because plants move and grow slowly, but you can still see good tunes on this one. What kind of tropism is this? Gravito at the beginning. Now probably hydro and phototropism. Here you have what? Phototropism. There's only one small light, the plants are all going towards it. Then they turn on the overall light in the room and they start to grow straight. That I am not sure. This is the motion of vines. Okay, and again, vines grow in this sort of swirling pattern until what happens? Yeah, they contact a vertical surface and then they'll start to wind around it. Again, that's thigmotropism.
Oh, we got it.
Okay, now there's
He looks so confused.
All right. I'm going to show you the other ones better about Venus flytraps. All right.